My mother publicly demanded I hand over the deed to my $1.3 million home as payment for the debt of raising me, but one photograph I posted in our family chat destroyed her entire empire within hours. That Saturday morning, I was making coffee in my kitchen when my phone erupted with a notification from Patricia, my mother, in our extended family group of 30 relatives. She'd composed an elaborate manifesto claiming I was heartlessly evicting her from her paid-off home and that the only way to make amends for my selfishness was to transfer ownership of my property to her immediately. The message dripped with theatrical victimhood. She painted herself as a destitute elderly woman facing homelessness because her ungrateful daughter had secretly purchased her mortgage to force her onto the streets. Within minutes, my aunts and uncles descended like vultures in the chat. They called me cruel, cold-hearted, and selfish. They insisted I hand over my house as a gesture of familial duty and atonement. I stared at the screen feeling nothing but ice in my veins. My name is Victoria. I'm 36 years old, and I've spent my career as a financial fraud investigator in Boston, tracking embezzlement and exposing hidden assets. But in my family's eyes, my professional expertise meant nothing compared to my role as the designated scapegoat. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. Growing up, my brother Marcus was the undisputed golden child. At 38, he never held a steady job, yet my mother constantly sang praises about his business brilliance while I was expected to fund everyone's emergencies. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built my career identifying deception, yet my own mother saw me as nothing more than a bank she could guilt into submission. But Patricia had made one catastrophic error in her public shaming campaign. She'd always bragged about owning her house free and clear for over a decade. She wore that debt-free status like a crown, lecturing everyone about financial responsibility. If she was suddenly facing eviction and desperately needed a property worth $1.3 million to replace her own, something catastrophic had happened behind the scenes. I muted the chaotic group chat, walked to my home office, and opened my laptop. As a financial investigator, I knew exactly where to look. Within 15 minutes of searching public property records, I uncovered the truth buried beneath her carefully constructed facade. 2 years earlier, Patricia had taken out a $500,000 home equity line of credit against her property. 3 weeks ago, the bank had filed a formal notice of default. She really was losing her house, but the numbers didn't align. If she owed $500,000, why was she demanding a house worth more than double that amount? People drowning in debt ask for life preservers, not luxury yachts. What was she so desperate to hide that required a 7-figure cover-up? The following afternoon, the answer walked directly into my office building. Marcus stormed past my receptionist, wearing an expensive designer suit that screamed fraud to anyone with financial expertise. His face was purple with rage as he pointed a trembling finger at me. "Mom is losing everything because you refuse to support my company," he shouted, his voice echoing through the marble lobby. I calmly pressed the security button and watched him unravel further. My security team arrived within seconds, but Marcus kept screaming about his startup, his investors, and how everything was my fault. As they escorted him toward the exit, he revealed exactly what I needed. Just sign over the house. My company went under, my investors pulled out, and if Mom loses everything, it's on your head. After he was dragged away, I dove into public filings for his alleged tech startup. The reality was utterly pathetic and devastating. Marcus had taken our mother's $500,000 home equity loan and systematically destroyed it. Luxury sports cars, first-class flights to fake business conferences, and a massive cryptocurrency gamble that vanished into thin air. But that still left a gap. Patricia had also maxed out 15 credit cards, accumulating $220,000 in debt to maintain her wealthy lifestyle illusion. Total debt, $720,000, with no assets to cover it. Then I realized there was only one other pool of money in our family that could potentially fill that hole, and the realization made my blood freeze. My grandmother Helen was 83 years old. Before my grandfather passed, he'd established an irrevocable medical trust designed exclusively for her end-of-life care. Patricia was the sole trustee. I accessed the state regulatory database and discovered that the welfare department was scheduled to perform a comprehensive audit of Helen's trust in exactly 10 days. The entire scheme suddenly crystallized with horrifying clarity. Patricia had drained her own assets to fund Marcus's delusions, and when the money evaporated, she turned to the only other source available, her mother's medical fund. She didn't want my house as an apology gift. She wanted to sell it and replace the stolen money before government auditors discovered what she'd done. What kind of person steals from their own elderly mother to fund their son's delusions? I drove immediately to the upscale assisted living facility where Helen lived. She was sitting by her window, watching birds in the garden, frail but with eyes as sharp as ever. When I told her about Patricia's recent visit, she described how my mother had arrived hysterically crying, claiming the medical trust had been wiped out by inflation and that Helen would need to move to a state-run facility by month's end. It was a cruel, calculated manipulation designed to prepare Helen for the inevitable discovery. I took my grandmother's hands and told her everything: the loans, the cryptocurrency, the fake company, and the upcoming audit. Helen didn't cry. Her face transformed into something terrifying, pure, ancient resolve. She slowly stood, walked to a locked cedar chest at the foot of her bed, and withdrew a thick manila folder. My grandfather had taught her to trust no one with money, not even her own children. For years, she'd secretly been requesting duplicate bank statements sent to a private post office box. She slid a single document across the table, a wire transfer authorization showing exactly $240,000 moving from her medical trust directly into Marcus's corporate account. At the bottom, where Helen's signature should have been, was a clumsy, desperate forgery in Patricia's unmistakable handwriting. "I survived a war and built this family from nothing," Helen said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "My own daughter will not steal my final years." We spent the next 2 hours creating a digital dossier with everything: bank statements, forged documents, threatening text messages. I brought in a specialized attorney the following morning. Meanwhile, Patricia escalated her performance in the family group chat. She announced a mandatory dinner at an upscale restaurant Friday night, framing it as a family tribunal where I would be forced to sign over my property in front of all 30 relatives. I typed my response: "I'll be there. Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake." Friday arrived with bitter cold. I walked into the private dining room wearing a tailored suit, radiating the calm confidence of someone holding all the cards. The room was packed, 30 relatives shoulder to shoulder around the table. Patricia sat at the head, dabbing her eyes dramatically with a napkin. Marcus sat beside her, practically vibrating with arrogance, a printed property transfer deed and silver pen waiting in front of him. The moment I sat down, the room erupted into chaos. My Aunt Catherine called me a disgrace. Uncle Robert slammed his fist on the table. Marcus leaned forward with a smug smile, telling me I'd never contributed anything valuable to the family. I sat silently for 10 full minutes, letting their venom wash over me. I needed them fully committed to the illusion. I needed them locked inside Patricia's cage of lies. Finally, the shouting subsided. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the group chat. I attached a single photograph, a digital collage I'd created. On the left, the official notice of default showing Patricia's $500,000 unpaid loan. On the right, the wire transfer from Helen's medical trust to Marcus's company. In the center, circled in bright red, was Patricia's forged signature. Across the top, I'd typed one simple question: "Where did Grandma's money go?" I hit send. 30 phones chimed simultaneously around the table. I watched my relatives look down at their screens, confusion morphing into dawning horror. Uncle Robert, who worked in real estate, zoomed in on the bank documents. His face drained of all color. The illusion shattered into irreparable pieces. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her throat. The mask slipped, revealing the terrified criminal beneath. Marcus knocked over his water glass, stammering incoherently as he tried to push away from the table. I stood slowly, smoothing my jacket. I will not give you my house to keep you out of federal prison for defrauding our grandmother, I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence. The state auditor arrives on Tuesday, Patricia. I suggest you find an excellent defense attorney. I turned and walked out without looking back. By the time I reached my car, my phone was vibrating continuously. The group chat was imploding, Aunt Catherine screaming in all caps, Uncle Robert calling Marcus a parasite. Within 30 minutes, all 29 relatives had permanently blocked Patricia and Marcus. The only person who didn't leave the chat was Helen, because you don't block someone you're actively prosecuting. The following week, the trap snapped completely shut. Helen's legal team bypassed civil courts and handed the forged documents directly to federal authorities. Because the stolen funds had crossed state lines into Marcus's offshore accounts, it immediately became federal wire fraud. Federal agents arrived at Patricia's house with a warrant Tuesday morning. They confiscated computers, financial records, and Marcus's ridiculous sports car. The state audit revealed the massive hole in the medical trust, and Patricia was stripped of her trustee role immediately. With federal indictment looming, the bank accelerated foreclosure. Patricia was officially evicted, her pristine reputation utterly destroyed, facing mandatory minimum sentencing for elder estate fraud and forgery. Marcus's accounts were frozen completely, left with nothing but the clothes on his back. 2 weeks later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia and Marcus standing on my porch in freezing rain. They looked hollowed out, no arrogance, no demands for apology gifts. Patricia fell to her knees, weeping, begging to sleep in my guest room because they had nowhere else to go. Marcus stood shivering, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at the two people who'd spent my entire life treating me as worthless, who'd tried to steal everything I'd built. I felt no anger, no sadness, only cold, peaceful silence. I reached into my pocket and handed Patricia an invoice, itemized for the 40 hours I'd spent unraveling her fraudulent schemes. "There's a shelter for miles down the road," I said flatly. "Don't ever come to my property again." I closed the heavy wooden door, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel, and locked the deadbolt. I walked back into my warm living room. Helen sat on my expensive velvet sofa, sipping chamomile tea, a soft smile on her face. Her medical trust had been secured and insured by the state. She was living with me now, far from the toxic wasteland of our former family. For the first time in 36 years, I was completely free, a beautiful home, a brilliant career, and a life no amount of manipulation could ever touch again. Have you ever had to cut ties with family who only remembered your value when they needed saving from their own terrible choices? Blood makes you related. Loyalty, respect, and integrity make you family. When people who should protect you throw you to wolves, you don't owe them your warmth. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to Zarabell Stories for more tales of justice and resilience. I read every comment, so tell me your story below.